Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp LaRouche. Today is July 29th, 2020. And I think it's almost an understatement to say that events of the last days have put us directly on a trajectory toward war, especially between the United States and China. And I think this is something that people are not hearing. They're not getting the full picture. And it's really up to you, Helga, to make sure that this picture gets out. And then all of our viewers can get it across to the people they're talking to. So where do we stand now, given the war talk coming out of especially people in and around Washington?
Well, I think it is extremely important to note that the U.S. China relations, which, as anybody who would think about the strategic situation should recognize, is the most important relation among any two nations on this planet, simply given the fact that they are the two largest economies. They are obviously, the two most important countries in terms of defining if the future of mankind in the coming period will be peaceful or, end up in a catastrophe. And in that light, one has to clearly see that since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, slowly, gradually, steadily, that relationship has taken a turn for the worse, and that we have reached an absolute point of crisis. Now, if you look at how this came about, well, first of all, China dealt with the coronavirus relatively well. For 2 months, they went into a lockdown. They were able to contain the virus very quickly, and they have returned very quickly as the only country on the planet to an economic growth rate, which in the last months was 11% increase as compared to the year before, naturally after a steep decline in the first quarter. But nevertheless, they are the only country which has the growth rate right now. And that clearly led to a situation where the war faction of the British Empire and their American leprolites basically started to escalate the attacks on China. It started off with British intelligence, and then people like Pompeo and many others accusing China of having suppressed the information, of having even, went so far to say that China deliberately sent infected people around the world to spread the virus. Then the Henry Jackson Society came out as the first one situated in London to say that China has to pay £9 trillion reparations. And then the chorus of people accusing China of all kinds of things became more shrill as the time went by. And unfortunately, also since about April, President Trump started to also talk about the Wuhan virus, the Kong virus, just blaming China more and more. But in the recent period, such people like Steve Bannon have gone into something which can be only called an absolute provocation. For example, he said that China and Xi Jinping are in the gun side of the United States. I mean, if that is not a threat, almost a personal threat against Xi Jinping. And you had all these people from O'Brien, the National Security Council, National Security Advisor, to Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, William Barr, the Attorney General, and naturally Pompeo topping it all, Esper, all making absolute bellicose statements against China, blaming them for the virus, blaming them for everything. And just recently, a couple of days ago, there was another gathering which included Bannon, Peter Navarro, also Michael Pillsbury, Senator Blackburn, and they all went into tirades blaming China now for the riots in Portland, which have been going on since 62 or 63 days with quite incredible violence. So if you look at all of this, if you accuse another country of having deliberately spread a pandemic, of having, basically caused incredible economic damage to the world economy, to the U.S. economy, and now you are basically saying that China is behind a violent insurrection and riots in the streets in several cities of the United States. I mean, if you take all of this together, what is supposed to be the result? It is building an enemy image for a confrontation. And I think this is very dangerous. First of all, there are all these unproven accusations. One can say that Russia Gate has been replaced with China Gate, but the confrontation line against Russia, unfortunately, has not really stopped. So I think this is really dangerous, and I think that people should really denounce that. I think this is a warmongering which can only lead to a catastrophe, and therefore, people should really absolutely distance themselves from that and basically say this is a course which can only lead to World War III, and we absolutely are not part of it. Because it is clear that this war faction is trying to build an anti-China alliance. They claim they already have success in getting India and Japan, New Zealand, the Indo-Pacific countries involved, which in part is true, in part not. But it's a very dangerous dynamic and should be absolutely denounced, because this is bringing us to the verge of World War III.
And while this is going on, the American people are getting a bit of the story of what the accusations are, but they're not hearing what the Chinese are saying, I don't think. And Helga, the Chinese have been very vocal in their response. Why don't you go through some of these responses that have come from officials from China?
Well, I think the tone of the Chinese also markedly has changed. I mean, it is not too long ago when Chinese diplomacy would be extremely restrained, always emphasizing the need for cooperation, offering models of great power relationships, being always absolutely toned down and low key in terms of any attacks. And that has changed. It has dramatically changed. It is almost like, there's a German proverb which says, how you shout into the woods, it shouts back. And if you hear, for example, statements from the Chinese Foreign Ministry calling Pompeo deranged, warning several statements by Wang Yi, the foreign minister, but also a spokesman of the foreign ministry, papers like Global Times, Xinhua, having all articles for the first time warning not to repeat the mistakes of the 1910s and the 1930s, clear reference to World War I and World War II. And there's a new article saying that we are now at the 106th anniversary of the outbreak of World War I, and that even if the world hopefully has become smarter than it was then, there is still the danger that we may go in the direction which can only end as a tragedy for all of humanity. So I think, the warning signs that China is really taking this all very seriously, and also naturally reacting to clear-cut provocations in the South China Sea, the whole effort to, really get every country hyped up against China in Southeast Asia and naturally South Asia. So they are reacting very, very strongly. And there was an article in Global Times by the chief editor saying that the only thing left for China is to build up very quickly its nuclear arsenal because that is the only thing which can contain US arrogance. Now, as you can see, this is the kind of spiral where, maybe it's not exactly a repetition of the Cold War, but this is something which can really be escalated. And I think that anybody who is not a complete geopolitical moron should absolutely distance themselves from these kinds of policies. Now, unfortunately, there is right now in the United States, among the leaderships of both parties, almost a consensus, because, remember that the whole pivot Asia was started by the Obama administration, and, the policies of Hillary Clinton were absolutely bellicose in terms of the wars intervening in other countries. So do not expect that there will be a change from the Democrats, because there is unfortunately a consensus among the leaderships, and the only thing left is to free President Trump from the coup, and hopefully this will then create conditions where he feels that he can go back to his policy of thinking that the relationship with Russia, a good relationship with Russia, is a good thing and not a bad thing, and going back to his earlier friendship with President Xi Jinping. But this is right now in absolute jeopardy. And what should concern anybody, that if you think, learn the lessons from history. With the riots going on in many American cities right now, and the absolute determination by the British, as they have expressed it in the report of the House of Lords a while ago, already 1.5 years ago, that they will not tolerate a second administration of Trump, that they have tried first Russiagate for 3 years. They couldn't prove a single thing. Then they had the Mueller investigation, the impeachment, that all went into absolute nothing. And now they are trying to escalate the relationship against China. There is nothing which will stop these people from, really trying to do some atrocity. And if you think back about the massacre in Mexico in 1968, or the Maidan in 2014 against the Ukrainian government, how did it escalate? There was in both cases a third force. That is that, you have these heated situations, then somebody intervenes, sharpshooters or some other provocation, causing casualties on both sides. And then you have a scenario which, could really go completely out of control. So I think that, blaming this all on China right now is really setting the whole thing up for a very dangerous thing. And it must be denounced ahead of time to have a fictitious advantage, so that, basically there is a chance that it can be stopped and avoided from happening.
Even as the Russiagate is disintegrating completely under the power of the exposés that, in part, that we've been involved with, and we'll get to that in a moment. But even as that's going on, we're seeing a continued anti-Russian line coming out. Some people saying the Russians are still involved in planning to disrupt the 2020 elections, when it's now been proven they did nothing to meddle in 2016. But I think one of the important things here is this whole question of the what we've done with the, I'm sorry, what I wanted to get at is the US Russian space discussion, which on the one side is seemingly positive, but has a danger within it. What happened when the US State Department and officials for the Space Command met with the Russians?
Well, this was the first time that such discussions took place after many years. So in that sense, it's positive. I don't know exactly what the result was, because so far we only have the statement from the American side. They said they want to continue, but it was clear that the US wanted to have a channel to discuss space security with the Russians, while the Russian proposition was to have a treaty basically banning the placement of weapons in space. So I don't know how the Russians are looking at the outcome, because just as these discussions started, the US announced their first space warfare doctrine. And actually, that was the whole issue, that the militarization of space was supposed to be avoided, because that just adds another dimension. If it ever would come to such things like space warfare, you can immediately talk about the annihilation of the human species, because it would involve an all-out nuclear war. So, that's why I'm saying that it's not just the U.S.-China relations, it's also the situation between the United States and Russia, which is still on a very dangerous grounds. And, it does require a change in policy completely. But we will talk about that in a while.
Well, now, the other thing I mentioned, alluded to just a moment ago, is that the Russia story from 2016 has not only been discredited, but there's more and more coming out to show that it was nothing but lies, and people knew they were lying. One of the key people in bringing this story to the fore has been Bill Binney, who's done several events with us recently. What is your sense of the importance of these events that Bill Binney has been doing?
Well, I think this is very, very important, because, Bill Binney, who was the technical director of the NSA many years ago, but he was one of the architects of designing a system whereby it would have been possible, if it would have been used, it would have been possible to detect 9/11, to detect other terrorist dangers. But that system was basically never used the way he designed it, but instead the NSA turned it into this massive, massive surveillance apparatus where they collect every data, just everything, from your phone call to what you do with your laptop to your remote control of your refrigerator, just absolutely everything. And Binney and some others were so disgusted that they became whistleblowers, because they feared for the freedom of the people and the Constitution. Uh, so, Binney now recently, not the first time, but again, when Roger Stone had his sentence commuted and he gave an interview to Fox TV, he immediately quoted Binney. So we interviewed Binney again on LaRouche Pack, and he again presented the absolute undebatable view, forensic evidence, that there was no Russian hacking, simply because it was an inside job. The computers of the DNC, somebody downloaded the emails and then probably gave them physically on some storage device to WikiLeaks. So anyway, so this was emphasized by Binney. He also said that he offered it to the US courts in the case of Roger Stone, in the case of General Flynn, but the courts refused to take it. He presented it already in 2017 to Pompeo on the request of President Trump. Pompeo sat on this information. He did absolutely nothing, and therefore let Russiagate continue. So he was de facto part of the coup. And, this all is the most incredible story. And you would think that, if there would be even a shred of investigative journalism left, that people would all over the place, jump on this story, because this is a really big scandal. It is involving a coup attempt against an elected president of the United States. And, it can be proven that it was based on lies, on the collusion, not with Russia, but with the British Empire. President Trump demanded the extradition of Christopher Steele to be tried in the United States. So there is plenty of circumstantial evidence to really go with this story, or at least, start to write about it. But the only ones which were reporting it so far were some newspapers or some blogs and some alternative papers, but it has not broken either in the mainstream media, nor has any parliamentarian or congressman picked up and said we need to investigate this. So if you think about that, you have a story which is really probably the biggest scandal in the history of the United States, or at least, running up for champion very close. You have the forensic evidence to prove, that the official narrative was completely made up, and the mainstream media are covering it up. The parliamentarians around the world are not investigating it. Now, if you would think that taking all of this together, that maybe we are living in a dictatorship, maybe we are living in a totalitarian system, well, at least that's worthwhile to think about, because, I think that the present situation where, the line is, there was no meddling or no collusion with the Trump administration, but Russia was still meddling. I mean, that is still part of the narrative leading to the confrontation with Russia. So I think the Binney story is really very, very important to be gotten out, and you should, look at his press conference, look at the Saturday event we had last Saturday with Binney. There may be other events with other people coming soon. Stay on it, distribute this, and discuss the implication for this, because it pertains to our all future and safety, because this is really, behind that is really what is the war party and the people who are threatening world peace right now.
And just to make a connection to what we were just talking about with China, the fact that Binney in October 2017 presented this to Pompeo, and Pompeo did nothing with it when he was the CIA director, he could have done something with it. Then we see Pompeo in London cavorting around with the same people who were involved in spreading the Russiagate story. So those people who still say Pompeo is an honest guy, they have to rethink that. And I think that's Bill Binney's work is extremely important for addressing as well this question of a dictatorship in the United States. Now, we need to get to a couple of other topics. One of the most important is the spread of the pandemic in the United States and worldwide. The World Health Organization just said that it's clear that this is not a cold weather disease from what we're seeing with spread in the South, the Southern Hemisphere, even in the warm period. Where do we stand with this, Helga?
Well, I think, as the WHO just said, it is not many waves. It's not one second and third wave, but it is one continuous wave which goes up and goes down depending what measures are being taken. And we can see right now that it's coming back in Spain, that clearly related to some of the behavior of some of the tourists and a general tendency in the population to just don't take it serious anymore. Then we have naturally a horrendous situation in the developing countries. There is now 4 organizations, the FAO, the WHO, the World Food Program, and UNICEF, who are all warning that you have a danger of a mass death of children who are suffering malnutrition. They say that there is the immediate need to have $2 to $4 billion food aid to solve this, or to try to diminish this. So it's a total catastrophe. And in the United States, the pandemic is clearly out of control. Dr. Birx was just in several states in the South and the Southwest. And she talked to several governors and told them that they have to reverse course and go back to more rigid measures. The governor of Tennessee flatly refused that. She also warned that 11 cities are about to become hotspots. In Germany, it's coming back, where the Robert Koch Institute said that they're extremely concerned that Germany is very ill prepared for a recurrence of the pandemic. Now, I think this is making all very clear that if you look at what is ahead of us, if we do not immediately change the system, then what will play out is you will have, the pandemic going up and down in the same wave, but getting stronger in some continents, and it will ease in other continents. But until we have really a vaccine, and now I know several people will shriek again and say, "Oh, vaccines." I mean, vaccines are not a bad thing. Vaccines were developed by Louis Pasteur. They're based on a scientific method. Naturally, everything can be used for a dual purpose, but to flatly refuse vaccines is also a very, it's part of playing into the same Malthusian policy, which the same people, who say Bill Gates is behind an effort to reduce world population, they themselves, in refusing to take this pandemic seriously, are playing into the policies of the Malthusians. And, Bill Gates for sure is also a Malthusian. We have written about that many decades ago, long before the people who are now talking about Bill Gates even discovered it. But what is the problem is that it is the Malthusian policies, the policies of maximum profit for a few, the policies of the City of London, of Wall Street, that system which has lowered the living standard of the population in the developing country, that has led to the privatization of the health sector in the so-called industrial countries, that all has set the conditions for this pandemic to even become a pandemic. Because if you would have a good health system in every country, you could have contained it right from the beginning, which was demonstrated by China, by South Korea, by Singapore, by Vietnam, and some other countries, which showed that you could contain it. The fact that you had a system completely oriented towards profit making for profit's sake, that is what is the problem. And until that is replaced by a system for the common good of the people, there is no protection for the general population, which is why we are demanding, that you absolutely have to have a new Bretton Woods system. You have to have a complete reorganization of the system to provide long-term credit. You have to build the world land bridge. You have to bring development in every corner of the planet, and then you have a chance to contain the pandemic.
And you'll also have a chance to reverse the systemic collapse, which is really about to take off. I think the important thing you were just developing is that there is a solution. We've put out the plan for 1.5 billion new productive jobs worldwide and 50 million in the United States. And yet what we're seeing is a continuation of bailouts treating the economy as a financial system. So Helga, where do we stand? I know we're facing waves of evictions, of foreclosures, and so on. This is coming up really quickly, isn't it?
Yes, I mean there are built-in bankruptcies. If the people who receive short-term money are not getting that any longer from the governments, which is an open question right now, you will have more unemployment, mass unemployment. In the United States, for example, the average eviction rate was 2.4 million every year. Now, this is threatening to become more than 2 million a month. Now, obviously, that would all lead to more social chaos, more social chaos. And, I think that if people look at all of this, they must understand that there is something fundamentally wrong with the system. And let me just use one example, this recent scandal about this financial firm Wirecard. Now, this is one example, that this system is so corrupt down to the bone. I mean, this was a case where they ripped off their customers. It now turns out that many people in high positions knew about it. The German BaFin, the organization officially in charge of investigating financial fraud, did not pay any attention. They got even Merkel to go to China, to Russia, to make advertisement for Wirecard. And it turns now out that it was just a ripoff. They were selling certificates for things which did not exist, including gold. So many years ago, when the Madoff scandal happened in the US, I wrote an article saying that the entire financial system is an entire Ponzi scheme, an entire Madoff scandal. You had the Libor manipulation. You had all the many cases. All these banks were in. Have they gone to jail? Have the bankers gone to jail? Was there a Pecora commission investigating all of this? Well, the answer obviously is no. But the result of all of this is that the populations are losing trust in their governments, in the system. And this is a very dangerous thing. And, if the population more and more is convinced that, there are only a small cast of people who fill their pockets, who become richer and richer, and they leave the general population, exposed to all of these dangers, pandemic, unemployment, all of these things. This is a systemic threat, but the systemic threat does not come from the Chinese government. It comes from the corruption of this present system, which is why we have to go back to a policy of, New Bretton Woods, FDR, the idea that peace can only be maintained if the living standard of the entire world population is raised. And I think we have to go back to the American system of economy, to the policies of Alexander Hamilton, of Friedrich List, where the common good is regarded as the engine of the welfare of everybody, and not the privilege of a few. So we are at an absolute branching point. I think the only thing which will remedy the situation in time is to have this summit, which is presently organized by President Putin, to have a conference, a summit of the Permanent Five of the UN Security Council. They must discuss a change of the system. I don't think we can wait until the November election, because, if you think that in these 3 months which are ahead of us, a lot of things can happen, and you have to have security long before, and you have to stop especially this China bashing, Russia bashing, and you have to go to a new paradigm of international relations, and then you can find a solution. But we need your cooperation because, this is a very dangerous moment in history, and we need the people to help to correct it. It is up to everybody of us.
Well, Helga, I think that's very clear, and I think our viewers will appreciate your putting this forward and putting it on their plate that they have to act now. So thank you for joining us this week, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, till next week.